Section 1. Lavender Town, the song that would not let go. There is a small town tucked into the northeast corner of Kanto. It has no gym. It has no department store. It barely has a handful of buildings. On the map, it looks like a quiet, forgettable place. You pass through it, you heal your Pokémon, and in most games, you move on. But Lavender Town is not forgettable, not even a little bit, because the moment you step inside its borders, the music changes. The cheerful, bouncing melodies that carry you through Pallet Town and Cerulean City and Vermilion Port just stop, and what replaces them is something else entirely, something that sits at the edge of your ear and refuses to leave. A high, dissonant pattern of notes that loops over and over, neither resolving nor resting, just continuing. Watching. Lavender Town's music was composed by Junichi Masuda, one of the franchise's most foundational creators. He is responsible for much of Pokémon's earliest sound design, and he has spoken in interviews about wanting each area to have a distinct emotional atmosphere. Lavender Town was supposed to feel like grief, like reverence, like the awareness that not everything in this cheerful adventure world ends happily. The town exists in the shadow of Pokémon Tower, a massive structure that serves as a graveyard for Pokémon who have passed away. Trainers come there to mourn. The ghost of a Marowak drifts through its floors. The whole place hums with something quiet and heavy and strange. And Masuda wanted the music to carry all of that weight. He succeeded, maybe too well, because sometime around 2010, a story began circulating online. It spread the way these things do, slowly at first, picking up weight as it moved from forum to forum, each retelling adding a new detail. The story claimed that shortly after Pokémon Red and Green launched in Japan in February 1996, something happened to children who played the games. Something no one could quite explain. According to the story, children between the ages of 7 and 12 began reporting severe headaches, then nausea, then sleep disruptions, then something darker. The story claimed that a wave of suicides swept through Japan in the weeks following the game's release, concentrated among that same young age group, and that the cause was traced back to a specific section of the game, a specific moment when the player crossed the border into a small northeastern town and the music started playing. The theory went by several names. Lavender Town Syndrome was the most common, and it was built around a genuine acoustic idea that the original Japanese version of the Lavender Town theme contained binaural tones in the upper frequency range, frequencies that children's developing ears could detect, but adults could not. High-pitched components that allegedly produced disorientation, anxiety, and in the most extreme tellings of the story, drove vulnerable young minds towards self-destruction. When the game was localized for Western release in 1998, the story claimed those frequencies were deliberately removed, altered, scrubbed from the audio before anyone outside Japan could hear what they had done. The evidence people pointed to was real, at least partially. The original Japanese Lavender Town theme does sound different from the international version. It is noticeably sharper, with a harder upper register. The tones in the Western release were softened, the composition slightly adjusted. Nintendo has never publicly explained exactly why. That silence, that absence of an official reason, became the hollow at the center of the theory into which people poured everything they imagined. A deleted YouTube video once claimed to show a spectrogram analysis of the original Japanese audio, and in that spectrogram, fans said they could see the shapes of ghost Pokémon, and among them, spelled out in the unknown alphabet, the words, "Leave now." The video was shared thousands of times before it was taken down, and many people who had seen it described a cold, prickling feeling that lingered long after they closed the browser. Some things are designed to make you feel something before your rational mind catches up. The story of Lavender Town Syndrome is entirely fictional. There were no documented mass suicides among Japanese children in early 1996 connected to the game. No one died from hearing a video game theme. The frequencies in the original track, while slightly higher than the international version, are not medically dangerous and do not match the clinical definition of binaural beats in any meaningful way. Game Freak altered the music for reasons that were almost certainly mundane, related to localization standards or audio hardware differences in Western Game Boy models, or simply the natural refinement that happens when a game is prepared for a new market. Junichi Masuda has stated in interviews that the original theme was designed to produce unease, and the adjustments made were part of the normal polish process, nothing more. And yet, the legend persisted. It gained traction on 4chan, on Reddit, on creepypasta archives that exist purely to pass around the kind of story that stays with you at 3 in the morning. Fans produced audio manipulations and edited screenshots and false documentary-style write-ups that were polished enough to feel believable. By 2012, Google searches for Lavender Town Syndrome were peaking. Some people swore they could hear the difference. Some people reported feeling anxious when they listened to the original track. Though whether that was the music itself or the power of suggestion is genuinely impossible to separate. The placebo effect is real. The atmosphere of a well-told story is real. The way childhood memory wraps around a piece of music and makes it feel permanent and significant is very, very real. What Lavender Town Syndrome tells us is something more interesting than whether the notes could kill you. It tells us about the way Pokémon occupies a strange emotional territory in the minds of the people who grew up with it. This was a game marketed to children. Its world is bright and round and full of creatures that become your friends. And yet from the very beginning, the designers put a graveyard in it. They wrote Pokédex entries about loneliness and grief, and creatures who wear the bones of their dead mothers. They built a town that exists entirely to hold loss. That tension, between the cheerful surface and the darkness underneath, created a space that fan storytelling has been filling for 30 years. The Lavender Town creepypasta works because some part of it feels emotionally true, even when the facts are false. The idea that a place could be coded with something harmful, that the thing you loved as a child was quietly more dangerous than it appeared, that there are frequencies in the world adults cannot hear but children can, these ideas are not rooted in fact, but they are rooted in feeling, in the specific feeling of childhood, when the world felt larger and stranger and more full of invisible forces than it does now. There is one more layer to all of this that is worth sitting with. The story of Lavender Town, of the tower where Pokémon are buried, of the ghost who drifts through its upper floors, of the music that refuses to resolve, was designed by people who were thinking seriously about what it means to include death in a story for children. The ghost on the upper floors of Pokémon Tower is not random. It is the spirit of a mother Marowak, killed by Team Rocket, still protecting the floor where her child might walk past. The entire building is a meditation on grief, on the gap left behind by something you cannot bring back. The music Masuda wrote is the sound of that gap. It is hollow in the right places. It does not end the way music is supposed to end. It keeps going, because that is what grief does. No one died from hearing it, but millions of children sat in the glow of a tiny screen and felt something shift in their chest, something quiet and hard to name, and they carried it with them. And 30 years later, they are still talking about it. That is the real mystery of Lavender Town. Not the frequencies, not the suicides that never happened. The mystery is why a piece of music 8 seconds long, looping on a Game Boy cartridge in 1996, still makes grown adults feel something they cannot quite put into words. Some things do not need to kill you to leave a mark. If you are watching this right now, wherever you are in the world, drop a comment down below and tell me the time and place. I love knowing where these videos find people. And if you are enjoying the journey so far, hitting subscribe means you will be here for every mystery we unpack together. Now, let us keep going. Section 2. The Great Pokémon War, What Happened Before You Arrived. When you start a new game in Pokémon Red or Blue, you are a 10-year-old child standing in a small town at the edge of a road that leads to everywhere. Your mother wishes you well. Professor Oak bumbles into your path and gives you a Pokémon. And then you are off. The world opens up. It is bright and full of tall grass and friendly strangers who want to battle in town after town with a gym leader waiting at the end. It feels on the surface like a world made for adventure. Simple, clean, safe. But spend some time really looking at the world. Look past the cheerful music and the friendly NPCs and the battles that are more sport than conflict. Look at what is missing. There are almost no adult men in Kanto. This is not a small detail. It is everywhere once you see it. Your father is not present. Professor Oak's son is gone. Blue, your rival, has no parents, only his grandfather. When you walk through town after town, the fathers are absent. The gym leaders and the rocket members account for some, but not all. The ordinary adult men who would populate a living world, the shopkeepers and the farmers and the neighbors, they are simply not there. The world is populated by children, by elderly figures, by women. The men of the generation that came before you are missing. And then you walk into Vermilion City, and you meet Lieutenant Surge. Surge is the gym leader there, an enormous, loud American who runs an electric-type gym with military precision. He calls you kid. He tells you that you would not last in combat. And then he says the line that started everything. Electric Pokémon saved me during the war. He says it casually, the way someone mentions something they carry around every day, something so embedded in who they are that they do not even notice they have said it. Just the war. Like, you know which one he means. Like everyone in this world knows which one he means. The great Pokémon War theory holds that this throwaway line is not throwaway at all. It is a window into the history of this world. A history of conflict, of a war that happened before the game begins. A war that consumed the adult men of Kanto and left behind a generation of children and the fragments of a society still rebuilding. Lieutenant. Surge survived because his Pokémon protected him. Other people were not so lucky. And the absence of fathers across the entire region is not a quirk of game design, not an oversight, but a deliberate structural choice meant to show you a world that has not fully healed from something terrible. The theory has accumulated evidence over the years, layer by layer, as fans looked more carefully at details that seemed unrelated until they were placed side by side. Consider the infrastructure of Kanto. It is a region that has gyms in every major city. It has Pokémon centers on nearly every block. It has an extensive underground tunnel system beneath Kanto, a network that makes no practical sense for a peaceful society. Underground tunnels, in the real world, are built during periods of conflict. They are bomb shelters. They are escape routes. They are the kind of thing you dig when bombs are falling on the cities above. Kanto has them everywhere, and the game never explains why. Consider the Safari Zone. It is a nature preserve, sealed off from the outside world, where wild Pokémon roam in a controlled environment. In our world, nature preserves are often established after periods of destruction, when ecosystems need to be protected from further damage. The Safari Zone in Kanto feels less like a tourist attraction and more like a refuge, a place where the natural world was deliberately kept safe while something terrible happened around it. Consider the Cinnabar Island Pokémon Mansion. By the time you reach it, it is a burnt ruin. The researchers who work there are gone. The journals they left behind speak of experiments conducted in secret, of a creature engineered to be the most powerful in the world. Those experiments did not happen in a vacuum. Mewtwo, the weapon born from Mew, was created by scientists who had a specific goal in mind, and weapons are made for wars. Consider, too, what happens when you travel to Unova in the 5th generation games and look at its history. The Unova region was involved in a massive war in its past. A war in which the legendary dragon Pokémon, at the heart of the region's mythology, played a decisive role. The descendants of the ancient heroes of that war became the protagonists of Black and White and Lieutenant. Surge, when he appears in the Pokémon World Tournament in Black 2 and White 2, is referenced as someone who came from Unova to settle in Kanto, an American, in real-world terms, who moved from one country to another after a conflict. A veteran of a war that left scars on both regions. Some fans have argued that the war was between Kanto and Johto. Others believe it was between Kanto and Unova. The exact opponents are less important than the shape of what is left behind. A region missing its adult male population. A gym leader who speaks of it directly. An infrastructure that implies crisis. A secret laboratory where the most powerful weapon in the world was created in a burnt-out ruin that nobody has cleaned up. There are counter-arguments, and it is worth being honest about them. The absence of adult men might simply be a feature of the era in which the game was designed, when character sprites were limited and the development team made choices about which NPCs to include based on what the story needed, rather than realistic population distribution. The later remakes, Fire Red and Leaf Green, added more male trainers to the world, which some interpret as evidence that the original absence was unintentional, and Surge's line might be exactly what it appears to be. A single flavor text sentence meant to give the character some personality, with no deeper narrative infrastructure behind it. But here is what is genuinely undeniable. LT Surge says those words. The game presents a world in which fathers are almost universally absent. Kanto has underground tunnels and a burnt laboratory and a graveyard town. Team Rocket, an organized criminal syndicate, controls much of the region's power structure without serious resistance, which is exactly the kind of vacuum that opens when legitimate governance collapses. And the games, from their very first generation, have been filled with references to Pokémon being used in conflict. The Kalos War in X and Y, where an ancient machine fueled by the life energy of Pokémon and people was used as a weapon of destruction. The Unova War in Black and White, where legendary Pokémon became instruments of ideology. The pattern is there across the entire series. The more you look at Kanto through the lens of Aftermath, the more it holds. The cheerfulness you feel as you walk through it is the cheerfulness of a world that has chosen to move forward, that has built gyms and contests and leagues so that the children who grew up without their fathers have somewhere to put their energy, so that the violence of the past gets redirected into something controlled and structured, something with rules and referees, and a center where your companions get healed no matter what. Pokémon is, at its core, a game about the next generation inheriting a world they did not build and trying to do something good with it anyway. The great Pokémon War theory does not undermine that. It deepens it, because the reason it matters that you become a champion, the reason Professor Oak watches you with something that looks like hope, the reason the whole journey feels like more than just a game, might be exactly this. The adults who were supposed to show you the way are gone, and so you go yourself, into the tall grass, into the unknown, with a small electric creature beside you, and no map of what is ahead. That is not a cheerful story, but it is a true one. Section 3. Ditto, the shapeshifter who should not exist. There is something odd about Ditto, something that goes beyond its unassuming appearance, beyond the blob of lavender with two-dot eyes and a small curved mouth, beyond even its remarkable ability to transform into any living creature it encounters. There is something odd about the way Ditto fits into the world, the way its data sits in the game, the way every piece of it echoes another Pokémon in ways that seem too specific to be coincidence. Start with what you can measure. Ditto and Mew share the same weight, 8.8 pounds. That is a precise number, and weight data in the Pokémon games is not assigned casually. It is part of each Pokémon's individual data signature. Two Pokémon sharing it exactly is notable. Ditto and Mew share the same base stat total. Every category of measurable ability, from speed to special attack to defense, when added together, produces the same number for both creatures. Their shiny forms are the same color, a pale, icy blue. Their normal forms are both pink. They are both genderless. They are both capable of breeding with nearly any Pokémon species. They are the only two Pokémon in the original game capable of using the move Transform, the ability to become something else entirely. The only two. In Pokémon Yellow, the location where you can encounter Wild Ditto shifts significantly from Red and Blue. In Yellow, Ditto appears almost exclusively in the Pokémon Mansion on Cinnabar Island and in Cerulean Cave. Those two locations are not random. The Pokémon Mansion is the abandoned research facility where the journals describe the discovery and study of Mew, and the subsequent genetic engineering project that produced Mewtwo. The mansion's basement is where those experiments took place. Cerulean Cave is where Mewtwo settled after escaping. If you wanted to pick locations in all of Kanto that were most connected to the history of Mew and its cloning, those are the two you would choose. And Ditto lives in both of them. The theory that Ditto is a failed Mew clone has been part of Pokémon fan discourse for decades. The structure of it is simple and compelling. When the scientists in the Pokémon Mansion attempted to clone Mew, they were not working with perfect precision. They were doing experimental genetic engineering in a world where the science was new and the subject material was arguably the most genetically complex organism that has ever lived. A creature whose cells contain the complete DNA of every Pokémon species that exists. Cloning that would be extraordinarily difficult. The theory suggests that many attempts were made before Mewtwo, that the process produced failures alongside the single success. That those failures, creatures with Mew's basic body plan and its core ability to transform, but lacking the power and the identity and the fully realized genetic architecture of the original, scattered when the lab was abandoned. They became Ditto. The stem cell analogy that some researchers have used to describe this is genuinely interesting. Mew, as the ancestor of all Pokémon, carries undifferentiated genetic potential. Every Pokémon that exists is in some sense derived from what Mew contains. An incomplete clone of that ancestral material would be something that retains the capacity for transformation, the ability to shift and adapt and become, without ever achieving the specific stable identity of the original. Ditto cannot become a permanent anything. Every transformation it makes lasts only as long as it chooses to maintain it, and then it collapses back into itself, back into the pink blob with dot eyes, not because it lacks ability, but because it lacks a blueprint. It has the raw material without the finished design. There is a technical detail that some fans have pointed to as additional supporting evidence. In the original Generation 1 games, if you use Transform and then allow Ditto to be caught or transferred in certain conditions, the game's internal data briefly flags it as Mew during the processing sequence. This is a programming quirk rather than a deliberate design choice, but the fact that Mew's data and Ditto's data are close enough to be confused by the game's own code is striking. They occupy adjacent space in the architecture of the game's programming. They are near each other in ways that have no logical explanation, unless they were created in relation to each other. The Pokémon Company has never confirmed the theory. They have also never denied it. When pressed on the relationship between Mew and Ditto, official sources tend to respond with comfortable ambiguity. The connections are real. The implications are left for players to decide. This is, interestingly, consistent with how Game Freak has handled the theory across 30 years. They have not removed the evidence, not updated the location data in newer games to put Ditto somewhere that does not suggest its origin, not added Pokédex entries that clearly explain its existence in a way that rules out the clone hypothesis. Every generation of games that includes Ditto leaves it ambiguous, which is either an oversight or it is the most consistent long game in the history of storytelling. Consider what the theory would mean if it were true. The Pokémon Mansion experiments produced, as their primary intended result, Mewtwo, a creature of extraordinary power and profound grief, a being engineered for strength who gained consciousness and experienced the world as an ongoing wound. Mewtwo became one of the most philosophically complex characters in the entire franchise, a living argument about the ethics of creation, about what it means to be made rather than born. And around that singular success were scattered dozens, or hundreds, or thousands of incomplete attempts, creatures that could not hold a stable form, that wandered the mountains and caves of Kanto, neither the original they were copied from, nor the weapon they were supposed to become. That is genuinely one of the saddest interpretations in the entire franchise, and it sits there quietly in every Pokémon game, waiting to be noticed. A small pink blob with dot eyes, looking at you, not saying a word. The transform move is the only thing it knows. It has been practicing its whole life, and it still cannot hold a shape that is purely its own. Section 4. Gary's Raticate and the question nobody asked out loud. There is a battle that you almost certainly do not remember. It takes place aboard a luxury ocean liner called the SS Anne, somewhere in the third act of Pokémon Red and Blue. Your rival, Gary, is on the ship the same time you are, and you fight him there, the way you always fight him, wherever you happen to be. His team at that point includes a Pidgeotto, a Kadabra, his starter, and a Raticate. You beat him. Of course you do. That is what happens in these encounters. You beat him, and he says something sharp about it, and you both move on. And then you never see Gary's Raticate again. The next time you fight Gary is in Pokémon Tower, in Lavender Town, the Graveyard Town. The tower built as a burial place for Pokémon who have died. Gary has come there for reasons the game does not state outright. He battles you again, and when you beat him this time, he pauses. He says something about going to see his Raticate, and the Raticate is not on his team. It has not been on his team since the SS. And it is simply gone. The theory that has grown up around this moment is one of the oldest and most emotionally resonant in the Pokémon fan community. It suggests that Gary's Raticate died. that the injuries it sustained during your battle on the ship were too severe, and that Gary was unable to reach a Pokémon Center in time, and that he has come to Lavender Town to lay his Pokémon to rest in the tower, where trainers bring the ones they have lost, and that when he says he is going to see his Raticate, he does not mean to play with it, he means to visit its grave. There is a detail that sharpens this theory considerably. When you encounter Gary in Pokémon Tower, before he challenges you, he asks why you are even there. He says something along the lines of, "Not any of your Pokémon have died, so what are you doing here?" The exact phrasing differs across translations and versions, but the core of it is the same. He is implicitly contrasting your situation with his own. You are here without a reason. He is here with the heaviest of reasons. And he does not say it plainly. He does not tell you what he has lost. He just stands in a Pokémon graveyard and asks why you have come, as if the answer, for him, is obvious. The theory is beautiful in its construction because it works on multiple levels simultaneously. It is a story about the cost of competition. In the world of Pokémon, battles are framed as friendly contests, as the way trainers grow and bond with their companions. But the theory asks what happens when a competition has permanent consequences. What if the Pokémon that faints in front of you does not simply recover at the Pokémon Center? What if, under certain conditions, the damage is irreversible? Gary never says this out loud. The game never confirms it. But Gary's behavior in Lavender Town suggests that he has learned something about loss that you have not yet been asked to understand. And there is something else this theory does that is genuinely affecting. It changes who Gary is. In the broadest reading of the game, Gary is your rival, the antagonist of your journey, the person who is always a step ahead and always quick to remind you of it. He is the one Professor Oak seems to prefer, the one who gets there first, the one who calls you a loser. He is, in the simplified grammar of the game, the obstacle. But if the theory is true, Gary is carrying something around Kanto that you cannot see. He is grieving. He is in a graveyard because he has someone to mourn. He challenges you anyway, because that is what trainers do, because the structure of this world demands it, but he is doing it with a wound that has not healed. And you beat him, again, in a graveyard, while he is mourning. That reframe is the most quietly devastating thing about this theory. You are the protagonist. The game has told you that. You are the hero of this story, and defeating your rival is part of the hero's journey. But the hero's journey in Pokémon Red and Blue, if you look at it through this lens, involves a child who has caused the death of another child's companion and will never be asked to account for it. The game does not make you feel guilty. It cannot. But the evidence is sitting there in the data, in the absence of a Raticate, in the presence of a rival in a graveyard, in a quiet line about going to see a Pokémon that is no longer on his team. There are counter-arguments, and honesty demands them. The most common response to this theory is that Gary simply boxed his Raticate. In the Pokémon world, you can store Pokémon in a PC system and swap them out whenever you choose. Gary could have decided Raticate was no longer a strong enough fit for his team and replaced it with something better. This is, in fact, the most mechanically likely explanation. Gary is a competitive trainer who is constantly upgrading his roster. Raticate at that level of the game is not a top-tier choice, and Gary would have access to better options as the journey progressed. But this counter-argument, while technically valid, runs into the problem of location. Gary is in Lavender Town. He is in a tower for dead Pokémon. If Raticate were simply retired to a PC box, Gary would have no reason to be there. You go to Pokémon Tower to pay respects, not to visit your box team. His presence there, combined with the disappearance of the Raticate, is what gives the theory its weight. A mechanical explanation for the missing Raticate does not explain why Gary is standing in a graveyard. There is also the question of what the game is trying to say with Lavender Town at all. The entire section of the game, the music, the gravestones, the ghost of a murdered Pokémon, the mourners who walk among the stones, is about the reality that Pokémon die, that companions are lost, that the world of training and battling is not without cost. Gary's presence there fits that thematic current in a way that the boxed Raticate explanation does not. Game Freak put him in that tower for a reason. The question is only whether that reason is the obvious one. The theory has never been confirmed. It probably never will be, because confirming it would require admitting that the player has done something permanently harmful to a rival's companion, which conflicts with the game's fundamental emotional contract, that battles are safe, that Pokémon heal, that nothing is truly lost. But the evidence is arranged on the board in a way that is hard to look away from. A missing Raticate, a rival in a graveyard, a line about going to see something that is no longer there. Some things in Pokémon are stated plainly, and some things are just left for you to find. Section 5. Gengar and Clefable. The shadow behind the light. Look at a picture of Clefable. Then look at a picture of Gengar. Do it slowly. Take your time. The body shape is nearly identical. Two round creatures, slightly hunched, with pointed ears, broad feet, small tails, and stubby arms. The proportions match in a way that is not coincidental. If you placed one silhouette on top of the other, they would align. The main differences are surface level. Clefable is pink and smooth and rounded, with a curling tuft of hair and a spiral tail. Gengar is purple and spiky, with a grinning mouth and glowing eyes. One is soft, the other is sharp. One catches light, the other swallows it. Gengar is officially classified as the Shadow Pokémon. That is its species designation, the label that appears in its Pokédex entry. Not Ghost type, not Phantom, Shadow. And the theory that has been circulating since the early days of the franchise is that Gengar is not just a Shadow Pokémon in the generic sense. It is Clefable's shadow, specifically. The physical manifestation of the darkness that follows a specific creature of light. The type matchup is the detail that makes this genuinely striking, rather than merely suggestive. Clefable is a normal type Pokémon. Gengar is a ghost type. In the game's battle mechanics, normal type attacks do not affect ghost type Pokémon, and ghost type attacks do not affect normal type Pokémon. They are immune to each other. In combat terms, they cannot touch each other. They pass through each other like they are made of different stuff entirely. Like one exists on a plane the other cannot reach. You cannot hurt your own shadow, and your shadow cannot hurt you. The Pokédex entries for both species, going back to the earliest games, share thematic threads that feel deliberate. Both Clefable and Gengar are associated with the moon. Clefable is described as being attracted to it, dancing in moonlight, said to arrive on shooting stars. Gengar is described as lurking in the shadows that the moon casts, as chilling the air around it, as hiding in the dark places that only exist because there is light somewhere else. Moonlight creates both the illuminated surface and the deep shadow beside it. One Pokémon lives in the light, the other lives in what the light leaves behind. Both species are also described as shy, in their own particular ways. Clefable is elusive, rarely seen, vanishing when it senses humans nearby. Gengar, despite its grinning face, is described in early Pokédex entries as enjoying the cold isolation of shadow, as hiding rather than confronting. They share a preference for obscurity that does not quite fit their overall characterizations. It is as if both creatures are managing an awareness of each other, circling around a relationship they have not been asked to name. The Valentine's Day image that Pokémon's official social media account shared some years ago, depicting Clefable and Gengar holding hands, was not an accident. The image set off a wave of renewed conversation about the theory, because Game Freak does not post holiday content carelessly. That image was chosen. It was drawn. Someone at the company looked at those two Pokémon and thought, yes, these two belong together for this. Whether that reflects a canonical in-universe relationship or simply a knowing nod to the fan community is something only the design team knows, but they have been making those nods for a long time now. There is a darker extension of the theory that arrived in later years and adds a genuinely troubling dimension. If Gengar is Clefable's shadow, then the implication is that everywhere a Clefable goes, there is a Gengar nearby, watching, following, haunting, in the literal sense of the word. The creature of moonlight dances in fields, and in the shadow at the edge of the field, something with glowing red eyes watches it, grinning, not threatening it, not attacking it, just being present, being the darkness that only exists because the light exists. This is the version of the theory that some fans find genuinely unsettling, not because Gengar is malicious, but because the relationship it describes is inescapable. You cannot have a shadow and not have the shadow follow you. The light does not get to choose. Wherever it goes, The darkness trails behind it, shaped exactly like it, always there, always watching with that wide, permanent grin. There is a layer of ghost-type Pokémon lore that makes this read even more specifically. Ghost types in the Pokémon world are consistently associated with death and grief and things that refuse to leave. Banette is a discarded toy seeking its child. Yamask carries the face it wore when it was human. Phantump is the soul of a child who died in a forest and took root in a dead tree. The pattern of ghost-type origin stories is that they are things that could not let go. Things anchored to the world by something unfinished. If Gengar was once something, and now it is a shadow following a specific creature across every mountain and field in moonlit night, then what was it before? What is it holding on to? What is the thing it cannot release? The theory does not answer that. It does not need to. The shadow is the answer. The shadow is both the most mundane thing in the world and the most unsettling. An exact copy of you, attached to you, made of the absence of what you are, following wherever you go, always just behind, always perfectly shaped like you. Always there. Clefable dances in the moonlight, and its shadow dances with it. Section 6. Ash's Coma, a theory about growing up. The Pokémon anime began with a child who was late. He overslept on the most important morning of his life and arrived at Professor Oak's laboratory to find that all the standard starter Pokémon had been claimed. The only thing left was a stubborn, uncooperative electric mouse who did not want anything to do with him. And then that child, that perpetually 10-year-old child with fingerless gloves and a backwards hat, set off on a journey that has never technically ended. Ash Ketchum traveled through every region of the Pokémon world for nearly 3 decades of real-world time, and in the internal logic of the anime, he aged less than a year. He stayed 10. Season after season, region after region, championship after championship, nearly won and then lost. He stayed 10. The same voice, the same energy, the same wide-eyed insistence that he was going to be a Pokémon master, forever 10. Forever running toward something he almost reached, and then ran toward again. The coma theory exists because this fact, the fact of his permanent childhood, demands an explanation. And the explanation the theory offers is this. Ash Ketchum has been in a coma since the first episode. Everything that followed. Every Pokémon caught and evolved and released. Every rival beaten and every league lost. Every friend made and every goodbye. All of it is happening inside the mind of a child who is unconscious in a hospital bed, whose body has not moved in years, whose real-world self is waiting for something to bring him back. The theory points to the incident at the end of the first episode as the moment of trauma. After Ash borrows Misty's bike and races to a Pokémon Center with the wounded Pikachu, the flock of angry Spearow bears down on them. Pikachu releases a massive lightning strike, a surge of electricity beyond what a small creature of its level should reasonably be capable of producing. The flash is blinding, and in the seconds after it, the episode shifts. A gentle musical sequence, a ho-oh flying overhead, colors that feel softer and more dreamlike than the episode's opening. Something has changed in the register of the world. Something has become less real. The theory holds that Ash absorbed enough electrical energy in that moment to put him in a coma, that the hospital treated him, that the medication stabilized his condition, and that the entire series is the dream state his mind constructed to process what he had lost, to explore what he might become, to work through the fears and desires and relationships of a 10-year-old who cannot wake up. Within this framework, every recurring element of the series takes on a new meaning. The Nurse Joys and Officer Jennies, who appear identically in every region, are not really identical women. They are what a dreaming mind does with a type. When you dream, the stranger in your dream is not a specific person but a composite wearing the features of an archetype. Every medical figure in Ash's dream world looks the same because to his dreaming mind, the nurse is a concept rather than an individual. The comforting face of the person who takes care of you when you are hurt. Everywhere he goes, that face is there because he needs it to be. Team Rocket's transformation from genuinely menacing antagonists in the early episodes to bumbling comic relief in later seasons maps onto a psychological arc of the theory with strange precision. In the original episodes, Jessie and James and Meowth are threatening. They are competent sometimes. They actually capture Pikachu on multiple occasions. They feel dangerous. But as the series progresses, they become less scary, more cartoonish, more harmless. The theory suggests this is because the medication Ash was given in his real-world coma was gradually stabilizing his neural chemistry. His anxieties were being chemically managed. The things that frightened him in his dream world became less frightening as the treatment took effect. The reason Ash never ages is the simplest part of the theory. In a coma dream, you do not age. The person dreaming is not living time in the normal way. The mind can sustain an infinite loop, can circle the same emotional territory forever, can build an entire world out of the need to keep going. 10 is the age Ash was when he fell. 10 is the age he stays, because the dreaming mind does not know how to be older than the moment the dream began. The reason Ash does not ride a bike throughout the rest of the series, despite having established that bikes are a normal and useful mode of transport in this world, is pointed to by the theory as evidence of a trauma response. The bike is connected to the accident. Even inside the dream, even in the constructed world where Ash is safe and powerful and moving forward, some part of him cannot get on a bike. He travels vast distances on foot through every region, past every road where a bicycle would make obvious sense, always on foot, always refusing. The theory is, of course, not canon. The Pokémon anime is a children's show, and the narrative it presents is the one intended: a boy on a journey, learning and growing, and eventually becoming the very best. Ash won a world championship in 2023 after more than 2 decades of near misses, and the series has since transitioned to new protagonists. The coma reading was never confirmed by the creators. Satoshi Tajiri and the anime's writing team have been consistently clear that the intended interpretation is the face value one. But the coma theory persists because it is doing something that the face value interpretation does not fully address. It is answering a question that the series quietly refuses to answer. What does it mean that this child never grows up? Not just why, in a technical sense. What does it mean? What does it feel like, from the inside, to be perpetually 10? To always be at the beginning? To always have the potential of becoming the very best without ever resolving into the person you were becoming? The theory, more than anything else, is a story about the way childhood looks from the outside of it. When you were 10, the world ahead of you felt infinite and wide and full of things you had not yet named. You were going to be something. You were going to become. And then time moved, and you did. And the person you imagined yourself becoming was replaced by the person you actually are, and the dream of 10 was left behind. Ash stayed. He stayed in the place where everything was still possible, where the journey was still at the beginning, where you had not yet learned which things you were and were not going to do. There is a kind of grief in that, if you look at it from a certain angle, and the theory, whatever its relationship to fact, captures that grief exactly. Some people in the comments of these theory videos write things like, "I used to think Ash was going to grow up. I used to think one day he would be a master and it would be over. And now I'm an adult and he's still 10, and I don't know how to feel about that." That response, that specific dissonance, is what the coma theory is really exploring. Not whether a cartoon character is unconscious, but what it means that growing up means leaving something behind, and what happens to the thing you left. Section 7. Cubone, Kangaskhan, and the Darkest Evolution. Cubone is described in its Pokédex as the lonely Pokémon. It wears the skull of its deceased mother on its head. It cries at night, gazing at the moon, and calling for a parent that cannot answer. When those tears fall on the skull it wears, the skull resonates, producing a sound that muffles the sobbing. The loneliest creature in the Pokémon world is crying inside its mother's bones, and the bones are muffling the sound so no one has to hear it. That is the official story, and it is already one of the heaviest things in a franchise that is theoretically aimed at children. But there is a theory that makes it heavier. A theory that has grown up around a specific observation about the structure of Pokémon's original 151, about the coding of evolutionary lines, about the visual similarity between two very different species, and about what happens when you put those things together. The baby in Kangaskhan's pouch looks almost exactly like Cubone. Kangaskhan is a large bipedal Pokémon who carries a young one in a pouch on her abdomen kangaroo style. The baby in that pouch has round eyes, a small body, and a markedly similar physical profile to Cubone, the small orphaned creature who wears a skull. The visual resemblance is strong enough that fans noticed it immediately, and the theory that grew from that noticing has a specific shape. Cubone is not the child of another Cubone or Marowak. Cubone is the orphaned child of a Kangaskhan. And the skull it wears is not just any skull. It is its mother's skull. The skull of the Kangaskhan who raised it, who carried it, who died. The theory holds that there was once an evolutionary connection between Cubone, Marowak, and Kangaskhan. That the intended design had Cubone evolving, eventually, into Kangaskhan, completing a cycle, an orphaned child, growing up to become a mother who carries her own young. That the progression from loss to nurturing was the intended arc. But that Game Freak, at some point during development, decided this was too dark. That the image of a child wearing its mother's skull evolving into a mother herself was too explicit a confrontation with grief for a children's game. So they severed the connection. They made Kangaskhan a standalone evolutionary line, self-contained, with no Pokémon that evolves into her and no evolved form. They left Cubone and Marowak as their own separate line, unconnected in the final game. And then, perhaps to fill the space left by that severed connection, they gave Marowak a ghost. The Marowak in Pokémon Tower, the one that Team Rocket killed, the spirit that drifts through the floors of the graveyard building and cannot be caught with a Pokéball, cannot be appeased by normal means, stays there. That is the mother. That is the Kangaskhan. That is the creature who died and left a child alone with nothing but bones for shelter. There is supporting evidence in the game's code. The glitch Pokémon known as M, which bears a resemblance to Missing No, and can be encountered through specific manipulations of the game's data, has a known property. Under certain conditions, it will evolve into Kangaskhan, not into a normal Pokémon, into Kangaskhan specifically. Some fans interpret this as a trace of the scrapped evolutionary data, a ghost of a connection that was removed but not fully cleaned from the code, the programming shadow of a Cubone that was supposed to grow up. Pokémon Sun and Moon added a mechanic called SOS calling, where wild Pokémon in low health can call for help from allies of their own species or related species. When Kangaskhan enters an SOS battle, the Pokémon she calls for help is another Kangaskhan. But there is a specific behavior that was noticed during the development of these games that has never been fully explained. Kangaskhan's call for help behavior in certain unreleased builds showed her calling for a creature from outside her own species. The data for exactly which creature was not preserved in a way that fans have been able to definitively decode, but the pattern of the code suggests a connection that was later edited out. What makes this theory particularly resonant is what it says about the Pokémon world's relationship with the life cycle. Most of the 151 original Pokémon are designed around growth, around becoming. A caterpillar becomes a butterfly. A small fire lizard becomes a great dragon. Progression is the engine of the entire franchise. But Cubone's arc, if the theory is correct, was designed around loss, around the thing that breaks the cycle of becoming, and around the extraordinary act of continuing anyway, of growing up, despite the absence of the person who was supposed to show you how. An orphaned child wearing its mother's skull, crying at the moon, and eventually, if the theory is right, becoming a mother itself, carrying its own child in a pouch and protecting it with the fierceness of someone who knows exactly what it feels like to be left alone. That is not too dark for a children's story. That is, in fact, one of the oldest and most important things a children's story can say. The theory remains unconfirmed. Kangaskhan has no official evolutionary connection to Cubone or Marowak in any released game. Game Freak has never acknowledged the scrap design publicly. But the baby in Kangaskhan's pouch still looks like Cubone. The code still has its traces. The ghost in Pokémon Tower still drifts, unable to leave. And Cubone still wears the skull, still cries at the moon, still makes a sound that the skull muffles so no one has to hear. Section 8. Missing. No. The ghost built into the game. It does not look like a Pokémon. When you first encounter it, floating along the eastern shore of Cinnabar Island after watching an old man demonstrate a Pokeball throw in Viridian City, what you see is a scrambled column of pixels, a backwards L shape made of visual garbage, a graphical corruption that the game renders with the same procedural dignity it gives to Charizard or Dragonite. It has a Pokédex number that does not officially exist. It has attack power higher than any creature in the game. It can be caught. It has a cry. When you look at it, some version of it stares back. Missing No. Its name is a truncation of missing number. It is, in the most technical sense, what appears when the game needs to reference a Pokémon that does not exist. A placeholder rendered visible. And it has become, in 30 years of gaming history, something considerably more than a programming quirk. To understand what Missing No actually is, you need to understand something about how the original Pokémon games handle their internal data. The game keeps track of Pokémon not by their Pokédex order, which is the order you see in the encyclopedia, but by an internal index number that is completely different. These two numbering systems do not match, and they were never intended to be visible to the player simultaneously. The mapping between them is handled by a lookup table that assigns each Pokémon its proper name, stats, and appearance based on its index number. When the game tries to look up an index number that does not exist in that table, something has to happen. A computer program cannot simply do nothing when it encounters a call. It cannot answer. The game's error handling system generates a Pokémon from whatever data happens to occupy that region of memory. That data is not random. It is pulled from real game variables, from things like the player's name, from the trainer battle data stored when you watch the old man's demonstration in Viridian City, but it is not Pokémon data. It is whatever the memory happens to hold. And the visual result of rendering that is the backwards L, the corrupted ghost, the missing no. The old man trick, the specific sequence of events that produces the encounter, works because of how the game stores battle data. When you watch the old man demonstrate a catch, the game temporarily replaces your player name in a certain memory buffer with the old man's name to run the animation sequence. When the demonstration ends, that buffer is not fully cleared. Your name goes back, but the data that was in the buffer during the demonstration lingers in adjacent memory. When you then fly to Cinnabar Island and surf along the eastern coast, the game uses that same buffer region to determine wild Pokémon encounters. It reads the lingering data, and depending on the specific characters in your player name, it produces specific Pokémon, or, in many cases, the missing no. This is the thing that makes Missing No technically fascinating beyond its legend. It is not an error in the sense of the game doing something wrong. It is the game doing exactly what it was designed to do, just with data it was never supposed to receive. The programming functions correctly. The lookup happens correctly. The Pokémon rendering happens correctly. The input is the problem. And the input is not even wrong, strictly speaking. It is just unexpected. The game built a system that worked perfectly for every intended use case, and a specific sequence of unintended use cases produced a creature out of corrupted data. Nintendo's official description of Missing No has always been that it is a programming quirk. That term is careful and correct, and completely sidesteps the more interesting truth, which is that Missing No is, in a meaningful sense, a Pokémon that the game itself created. Not the designers, the game. The interaction of the player's choices and the game's systems, and the specific way memory allocation works on an original Game Boy cartridge, produced something that had no blueprint, that was not drawn by anyone, that was not named by anyone, that simply emerged from the conditions of the system. The most famous property of Missing No, beyond its appearance, is its item duplication effect. Encountering it causes the sixth item in your bag to multiply, its quantity changing to a wildly inflated number represented by a glitched character in the inventory display. This happens because of the same memory buffer interaction that produced the encounter in the first place. The encounter with Missing No reads and writes to memory in ways that were never intended, and one of the side effects is that the byte controlling the quantity of your sixth item gets overwritten. The result looks like infinite items. In practice, the inflated quantity can cause instability in the save file if not handled carefully. Missing No is also, factually, the Pokémon with the highest base attack stat in the Generation 1 games, higher than Mewtwo, higher than Dragonite, higher than anything. Because the data it reads from memory can include values that were never assigned to any real Pokémon, the stat allocation it receives can be astronomical. A creature made of garbage data can, under the right conditions, be the most powerful thing in the game. There is something almost thematically appropriate about that. The cultural legacy of Missing No is genuinely remarkable. In the mid to late 1990s, when Pokémon was first sweeping through school playgrounds globally, knowledge about Missing No spread through exactly the kind of word-of-mouth oral tradition that video game myths have always traveled. One kid told another. The instructions were passed down. Some of the instructions were wrong. Some of the wrong instructions produced real effects, and some produced nothing. The game became partially mythological, a thing whose hidden depths were mapped by children, sharing incomplete information in the way children have always shared incomplete information. Rumors grew. The myth that encountering Missing No would corrupt your save file spread widely enough that some players avoided it entirely out of fear. The myth that Missing No was actually Mew, disguised as corrupted data, circulated for years. Neither was quite right, but neither was entirely without a kernel. There is one more layer to Missing No that tends to get lost in the larger story about it. The creature has appeared, in recent years, as an official Easter egg in Pokémon Scarlet and Violet, briefly visible in promotional material in a blink-and-you-miss-it moment that sent the fan community into a brief frenzy of analysis. Game Freak, after 30 years of treating Missing No as an unacknowledged quirk, allowed it a cameo, a nod, an acknowledgement that this accident has become, through the decades, as real as anything that was deliberately designed, that a glitch which emerged from memory allocation and lookup table errors has a place in the franchise's mythology that no amount of official silence can erase. Missing No was not made. It happened. And in happening, it became something that the game's designers never intended, a Pokémon that belongs to the players, to the 9-year-olds who told each other how to find it on the playground, to the teenagers who wrote guides about it in early internet forums, to the adults who still feel a little charge of something when they hear the name. It is the first Pokémon that no one designed and everyone discovered. And it is, in that specific way, the most genuinely mysterious creature in the entire franchise. What you see when you look at it is not really what is there. What is there is the game trying to tell you something it does not have a word for. The shape of an absence, given form by the act of looking for it. Section 9. The Unown and the language that predates everything. They are among the strangest Pokémon ever designed. 28 forms, each one shaped like a letter of the Latin alphabet, with the addition of an exclamation mark and a question mark for the later games. They live in ancient ruins. They drift in the shadows of walls covered in carved symbols. Their Pokédex entries are brief and carefully vague. They have an odd power that emerges when many of them gather. They are believed to have come from a different dimension. They precede written language, or are written language, or are the thing that written language was invented to approximate. The ruins of Alph in the Johto region are where you first encounter them. 4 chambers, each containing a puzzle, a sliding tile image that, when completed, causes the floor to crack open, dropping you into an underground hall where Unown emerge from the walls. Solve all 4 puzzles, and you can find all 26 alphabetic forms. If you listen to your Pokégear radio inside the ruins, channel 13.5 produces something that is not music, a transmission, a sound. Something in the specific frequency of the ruins themselves, like the stones are broadcasting on a frequency you were not supposed to be able to receive. The most persistent and elaborate theory about the Unown begins with a question. What did the civilization that built the ruins of Alph believe the Unown were? Because something built those ruins. Someone carved those images, placed those puzzles, designed chambers that specifically summoned specific forms of Unown when solved. This was not accidental. This was a system. A deliberate technology of interaction between human beings and the Unown, built by people who understood what the Unown were capable of and chose to structure their relationship with them through architecture and ritual. The ruins are not just a place where Unown happened to live. The ruins are a mechanism. Someone designed it. Fans have pointed to the thematic connections between the ruins of Alph and the Sinnoh creation myth as the most compelling extension of this theory. In the Generation 4 games, the Canalave library in Diamond and Pearl contains the Sinnoh origin story. In the beginning, there was a swirling chaos. An egg formed in it. The egg hatched, and Arceus emerged. Arceus shaped time and space and antimatter into Dialga and Palkia and Giratina. And then Arceus rested. The world was formed. Bulbapedia notes, through official game data, that Unknown has an unknown connection to Arceus. The word unknown is doing a lot of work in that sentence. It is not no connection. It is not unrelated. It is unknown connection, which acknowledges that a connection exists but declines to explain its nature. When a massive group of Unknown appear at the Sinjo ruins in Heart Gold and Soul Silver during the Arceus event, their emergence is directly tied to Arceus's act of creation. They appear when Arceus creates Dialga, Palkia, or Giratina in that moment. They witness the act, they surround it, they are present for creation in a way that suggests they are not just spectators. One theory holds that the Unknown are not merely shaped like language. They are language. They are the original alphabet of the universe, the symbols through which reality itself is named and therefore structured. In many human mythologies and philosophical traditions, the act of naming is the act of creating. To speak a thing into existence is to separate it from the undifferentiated chaos and give it form and identity. If the Pokémon world has a similar metaphysical structure, then the Unknown might be the instruments of that naming, not the record of creation, the mechanism of it. This would explain why their power intensifies when they gather. A single Unknown is one letter, one symbol, one unit of meaning without context. Gathered together, they become something that can form words. And if the language they form is the language of reality itself, then words in that alphabet are not descriptions of things. They are the things. The civilization that built the ruins of Alph may have understood this. The puzzles in the chambers, the specific slide arrangements that summon specific subsets of Unknown, may not be puzzles in the entertainment sense. They may be rituals, grammatical constructions in the language of reality, performed in stone, invoking the letters that name specific forces or entities into the vicinity of the invoker. The radio transmission at channel 13.5 is particularly interesting in this context. In Heart Gold and Soul Silver, it is described as a mysterious broadcast, audible only inside or near the ruins. What exactly it is remains unexplained in the games. Some data miners have noted that the melody produced by the transmission matches certain notes from the Azure Flute, the item used in Diamond and Pearl to summon Arceus. If the transmission inside the ruins of Alph, in the chambers where Unknown gather, shares its sonic signature with the instrument used to summon the creator of the universe, that is either a coincidence of extraordinary specificity or a deliberate thematic connection that the designers embedded across 2 generations of games. The ancient civilization theory, which connects the ruins of Alph to the Solacean ruins in Sinnoh and to the broader world of Pokémon legends, Arceus, through the Celestica people, suggests that there was once a single culture spread across multiple regions of the Pokémon world. A culture that understood the Unknown not as Pokémon to be caught and battled, but as fundamental forces to be understood and addressed. Their architecture encoded that understanding. The puzzles they built were not puzzles for children playing a game to solve. They were instructions for those who came after, for the next generation of people who might arrive at the ruins and need to know how to call the letters of the world into presence. What makes this theory genuinely unsettling in the best way is the silence at its center. The civilization is gone. The ruins remain, and the Unknown remain, and the puzzles still work, but the people who built them and knew what they were doing are entirely absent. You solve the puzzles, the floor breaks, the Unknown come, and you have no idea what you have just done because the manual was lost with the culture that wrote it. You have performed a ritual in a language you do not speak, something answered. You do not know whether what answered was what was supposed to. This is, in microcosm, what it feels like to inherit an ancient thing without the context for it. The ruins tell you what to do. They do not tell you why. And the Unknown that emerge from the walls look at you with their single eye, each one a symbol without a sentence, and they give you nothing but the awareness that you are in the presence of something much older than you. Some messages survive. The people who wrote them do not. And the Unknown drift in the dark of the ruins, waiting for someone to read them correctly, for someone to finally string them into the sentence they have been holding for centuries. Nobody has figured out what the sentence is. Section 10. The Ghost Girl of Lumio's City, the one who is still looking. Pokémon X and Y arrived in 2013 as the 6th generation of the main series. the first fully three-dimensional entries in the franchise's history. They were set in Kalos, a region clearly inspired by France, full of grand architecture and cobblestone streets, and a city at its center called Lumios, a place modeled on Paris, with a soaring tower at its heart and avenues radiating outward like spokes. Lumios is the largest city in any Pokémon game at that point. It is full of buildings to explore, cafes to visit, boutiques to browse. In the early hours of the game, you cannot access all of it because you have not yet earned the relevant gym badge. But you can enter many of the buildings on the outskirts, wandering through offices and apartments and small businesses. One of those buildings, on the second floor, has something that does not appear in any of the other buildings you visit. Something that stops the music. Something that makes the screen flash. The lights go out for a moment. The music cuts. And then, gliding toward you from deeper in the room with a walking animation that does not quite look right, not quite as smooth as the other NPCs, almost floating rather than walking, is a girl. She is rendered using the Hex Maniac character model, the same sprite used for a specific class of trainer who appears elsewhere in the game. But this version of her has no battle data. She is not a trainer you can fight. She moves differently than anything else in the game. She slides toward you, and before she disappears from screen, she says, "No, you're not the one." And then she is gone. That is all. That is the entire encounter. No subsequent dialogue, no item, no explanation, no indication from anything else in the game of what it meant, what you were supposed to do with it, what the one is, or who she is looking for. She appears. She judges you, she leaves. And the music comes back on as if nothing happened. Players noticed almost immediately, because the encounter is genuinely arresting, even if you do not go looking for it. The atmosphere of it is precise and deliberate. The flickering lights, the silenced music, the wrong walking animation, the specific words. This is not accidental game design. Something was placed here, with intention. The question that has never been answered is what that intention was. The theories accumulated quickly. The most immediate and practical suggestion was that the Ghost Girl was tied to a specific event Pokémon. In the Generation 6 era, certain legendary Pokémon and special items were distributed through timed real-world events, and sometimes these events were connected to hidden content in the games. Perhaps the Ghost Girl was a trigger point. If you arrived with a specific Pokémon in your party, or with a certain trainer ID, or having completed an unreleased event, she would respond differently. She would not say, "Not the one." She would say something else. She would show you something. The lock would open. No such event was ever released. The games moved on. Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire came out the following year, and eagle-eyed players found the same Hex Maniac character model in those games, at Mount Pyre, the mountain where trainers bury their Pokémon, saying the exact same line, "No, you're not the one," in a different region, in a different game, at a location associated with death and loss, saying the same words. The theories deepened. Some players suggested she was connected to AZ, the ancient king at the heart of X and Y's narrative. AZ built a machine that weaponized life energy, used it to resurrect his Floette, and in doing so cursed himself to an endless existence while the flower Pokémon he had saved drifted away from him. His search for his lost companion is the emotional backbone of the game's ending. One theory suggested the Ghost Girl was waiting for AZ, or was connected to AZ's Floette, or was herself a fragment of the grief that AZ's 1,000-year isolation had somehow made real and given form. The line, "not the one," would make a specific kind of sense in that context. She is looking for AZ. You are not AZ. You will never be AZ. The encounter is her endless search, made visible for a moment, and then returned to the walls of the building where it lives. A different theory pointed to the timing of the girl's appearance in Oras in relation to Phoebe, the Ghost-type Elite Four member in those games. Phoebe is a medium who communicates with Pokémon ghosts, who trains on Mount Pyre, whose whole character is built around the relationship between the living and the dead. If the Ghost Girl is connected to Phoebe, she might be one of the spirits Phoebe has an ongoing relationship with, manifesting in the physical world to look for someone Phoebe has promised to bring. The problem with this theory, as one researcher noted, is that the events of X and Y and Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire take place in different continuities, confirmed by the games themselves. The Ghost Girl cannot have traveled between universes to keep looking. unless she is not traveling between the games at all, unless she exists in both, because the thing she is looking for is not a person in the story, but something outside the story, something in the structure of the game itself. In some readings, she is looking for you, specifically you, the player. And the reason you are never the one is because whatever action was supposed to make you the one was never released. The event that would have triggered her recognition of you was canceled, scrapped, held back, lost. She keeps appearing because her programming is still active, her search is still running, but the thing she needs you to have was never given. In this reading, she is the most specific kind of ghost, a function without a purpose, a door without a room behind it. She was designed to receive something, to respond to something, to complete a circuit that was never closed. And so she wanders the buildings of Kalos and the mountain of Hoenn, drifting past every player who walks through, gliding with that slightly wrong animation and saying the same 4 words, because her recognition condition has never been met. Because you cannot be the one if the thing that makes you the one was never released into the world. The Ghost Girl was still saying not the one in Pokémon Omega, Ruby, and Alpha Sapphire in 2014. She was still there in the data of those games years later, when fans were still combing through their code. She has appeared, in spirit if not in sprite, in conversations about every subsequent generation of games, in discussions about what X and Y left unfinished, about the unreleased Hoopa subplot that data miners found evidence of, about the eternal Flower Floette distribution that was promised and never came. She is looking for someone, and she has been looking for more than a decade. She has walked past millions of players and found not the one among them. Somewhere in the data of a 2013 Nintendo 3DS cartridge, a function is still running, a condition is still waiting to be satisfied. A girl with a slightly wrong walking animation is still searching. Nobody has told her to stop. Section 11. Scattered mysteries. The questions the games left open. There are mysteries in Pokémon that do not fit cleanly into a single theory. They are smaller, sharper, tucked into corners of the games where most players never look. Some of them have answers that data miners eventually uncovered. Some of them remain open, unexplained, sitting in the games like fragments of sentences with no conclusion. One of them involves a man in Veilstone City in Pokémon Platinum. He is an ordinary NPC, positioned in a specific location in the city, and if you speak to him, he tells you that he saw a giant pink Pokémon flying in the sky above the city. He is casual about it, matter of fact, in the way NPCs often are when they describe things that should be extraordinary. A giant pink Pokémon flying overhead, visible from the city streets. No further information, no interaction that extends from this. He saw it, he is telling you, and that is all. The giant pink Pokémon is almost certainly Mew or Manaphy or Shaman or some other rosy legendary, or possibly nothing at all, a deliberately placed mysterious statement with no referent. But the specificity of the description and the choice to have an NPC deliver it so casually, as if this were just something that had happened, suggests that at some point in the development of Platinum, something was planned for this encounter. A scripted event, a triggered appearance of a legendary in Veilstone City's sky. That event was cut, or the Pokemon's appearance was moved, or the whole sequence was reworked, and the NPC who referenced it was simply never updated to reflect the changes. He is still there, still looking up, still telling anyone who will listen that he saw something pink and enormous moving through the sky above the city, and he has no idea what it was. Then there is the mystery of the Ruins of Alph radio transmission, which we touched on, but which has a specific detail worth dwelling on. In Heart Gold and Soul Silver, if you tune your Pokégear to frequency 13.5 inside the ruins, you hear something. Data miners have analyzed that transmission and found that it contains a melody, and that melody, note for note, matches the Azure Flute. The Azure Flute is an event item from Diamond and Pearl, never officially released to the general public, which when played at the peak of Mount, Coronet opens a staircase to the Hall of Origin and allows you to encounter Arceus. The connection between the radio signal of an ancient ruin full of letter-shaped Pokémon and the musical instrument used to summon the creator of the universe was never explained by Game Freak. It was found by fans. It is there. It has no official comment attached to it. The truck next to the SS Anne in Fire Red and Leaf Green is its own genre of mystery. For the entirety of the original game's existence, a playground rumor circulated that Mew was hidden under a truck near the Vermilion City docks. The rumor was elaborate and specific. You needed strength to push the truck, and under it was the rarest Pokémon in the game. It was false. The truck was simply a piece of scenery, but it became one of the most famous false rumors in video game history, passed from child to child like a secret too good not to share, believed by enough people that it took years for the collective understanding of the community to settle definitively that no, there was nothing under the truck. Then Pokémon Sun and Moon came out, and near a harbor in Alola, there was a truck parked near a dock, serving no gameplay purpose, acknowledging nothing, just sitting there. Game Freak had placed it deliberately as a nod to decades of playground mythology, a quiet acknowledgement that the false rumor had become, through the years, as much a part of the franchise's history as the Pokémon themselves. The truck exists in Sun and Moon not because anything is under it, but because the idea of looking for something under a truck became part of what Pokémon means to the people who grew up with it. The search became more real than the thing being searched for. There is the mystery of N's room in Pokémon Black and White, one of the most quietly devastating spaces in the entire franchise. When you reach the top of Team Plasma's castle and defeat N in the climax of the game, you learn things about him that reframe his entire character. He grew up in a room deep in the castle, surrounded by Pokémon that Team Plasma had confiscated, isolated from other children, raised to believe that Pokémon and humans could not coexist in a way that honored the Pokémon's freedom. His room, when you find it as you explore afterward, contains toys. Aged and well-worn toys, a child's playthings, in a room in the heart of a criminal organization's headquarters. There are old drawings on the floor. There is a basketball hoop. There is a rocking horse. The room says everything about N that his dialogue cannot quite say. He was a child who was given a mission instead of a childhood. His ideology is not a philosophy he arrived at through study. It is the only story he was told, and the room where that story was told to him, exclusively, for years, is a child's room, with toys, and no window. The fan theories about N are numerous, and extend into areas of the Pokémon world's mythology that the games themselves barely sketch. But the image that stays with people is not a theory. It is just the room, just the toys in the castle, just the space where a child grew up alone in the company of a belief he was handed and never given the tools to question. There is Spiritomb in Diamond and Pearl, which requires the player to interact with exactly 32 different players in the underground multiplayer area before it can be obtained. In the Generation 4 era, before smartphones made social coordination trivial, this was a nearly impossible requirement for children without large local friend groups who also owned the game. Many players never got Spiritomb legitimately. The Pokémon has an 108 for its key stats, and its Pokédex entry describes it as the combination of 108 spirits bound together, imprisoned after committing unspecified wrongdoings. The number 108, in Buddhist tradition, represents the number of earthly desires and spiritual afflictions that a person must overcome. The choice of that number for a Pokémon made of bound spirits is unlikely to be accidental. The mystery of Mirage Island in Ruby and Sapphire deserves its own place in this conversation. Located off the coast of Route 130, Mirage Island is a location that most players of those games never saw legitimately, not because it was difficult to reach, but because the condition for its appearance was tied to a random number generated each day by the game's internal processes, and that number had to match a value stored by one of the Pokémon in your party. The odds of this matching on any given day were astronomically low, somewhere in the range of 1 in 65,536. Players could cycle through the games for months and years, checking daily, and never see the island. The old man in Pacifidlog Town, who looks out to sea each morning and reports whether the island has appeared, became a kind of daily ritual for players in the community. Some players shared their numbers online, trying to coordinate appearances. Some gave up entirely and accepted that Mirage Island was something that happened to other people. The island itself, if you did reach it, contained nothing particularly extraordinary. A patch of grass with why not, and a berry tree with lychee berries, one of the rarest berries in the game. The destination was deliberately humble, almost anticlimactic, as if Game Freak was aware that the journey to it would outlast the arrival. The island is the thing you could almost always see from the shore, that the man in town always watched for, that was there in the world but never accessible on any given day. It is the thing that teaches you, quietly, that not everything in the world is meant to be found by any single person. Some things exist and are real and can be seen when the conditions happen to be exactly right. Most days, they are not exactly right. The island stays hidden, and you look at the sea and try again tomorrow. Then there is the mystery of Pokémon X and Y's unused content, specifically the eternal flower floette, AZ's Floette. The flower Pokémon, with a unique form found nowhere else in the game, was shown in the ending sequence of X and Y reuniting with AZ after 1,000 years of separation. Its stats, its moveset, its unique flower form, all of this exists in the game's code. An NPC in the game explicitly tells you that AZ's Floette will someday be available to players. The distribution event that would have delivered it was never held. Not in 2013, not in 2014, not in any subsequent year. The event windows for Generation 6 games closed permanently when the relevant distribution infrastructure was retired. AZ's Floette exists in the code of Pokémon X and Y, fully functional, fully designed, waiting, and nobody has ever received one through official means. It is, as some fans have described it, a ghost Pokémon in the real world. A creature that technically exists but cannot be obtained, permanently separated from the players who might have claimed it by a distribution that was planned and never executed, while the NPC who promised it to you still stands in the game world and tells you to wait. There is something almost poetic about that, in a franchise that includes so many stories about things that cannot be brought back, about the cost of waiting, about the space left behind by something absent. AZ's Floette, in the real world, is the most honest metaphor the franchise has accidentally produced. It was supposed to come. It did not come. And the absence of it has made it more significant than any normal distribution event could have. In the internal culture of Pokémon fandom, the phrase, like waiting for eternal flower Floette, has become shorthand for a promise that will not be kept, for something that was supposed to arrive and did not, for the specific kind of grief that comes from waiting for a thing that has no timeline and no guarantee. There are smaller mysteries in the margins of nearly every game. The invisible PC in a house in Celadon City in the original Red and Blue, where pressing A in a specific spot triggers the PC access menu despite no PC being visible. A relic of a developer copying map data without removing the interaction script. The buried alive rumor from the original Japanese internet communities. A supposed boss in early builds of Pokémon Tower who was replaced before release. An undead trainer who challenged you at the top of the tower and could drag your character underground if you lost, whose existence has never been confirmed in any data mining, but whose story has been retold in enough variations to take on a kind of folkloric momentum. The strange room in the Team Rocket hideout in gold and silver, where a scientist makes reference to a project involving Slowpoke, a project that implies genetic experimentation more extensive than what the games explicitly show. The message in Pokémon Black and White, written in Unknown on a specific wall in Twist Mountain, that when decoded reads simply, "Time flows." No context, no explanation. Just the words, in the alphabet of the letter-shaped Pokémon, on a mountain wall in a region far from the ruins where Unknown normally appear. Time flows. Someone put that there. Someone decided that those words, in that alphabet, belonged on that wall, and then gave no further information about why. The Pokémon games are full of moments like this. Moments where the game leans slightly toward you and says something in a quiet voice, something that does not quite connect to anything else, that hangs in the air after you have read it and refuses to resolve. They are the friction points where the designed world brushes up against something larger, something the designers knew about that they chose not to fully say, or something they began and chose not to finish, or something that is simply there, without authorship, produced by the gap between what the game contains and what the player's imagination fills in. Every generation of Pokémon games adds new ones, new NPCs with one strange line, new ruins with incompletely decoded messages, new data structures that data miners find and cannot fully explain. new events that are referenced and never released. The franchise has been running for 30 years, and it has never stopped leaving small mysteries in the corners of itself. Some of them will eventually be explained, some will not. Some of the unexplained ones will become creepypastas, will grow and mutate as they pass through the community, will pick up details they were not born with and shed details they once had, until what circulates is no longer quite what was found, but something built collaboratively by the imagination of thousands of people who all wanted the same thing, to believe that there was more to find. That is, when you think about it, exactly what the franchise was designed to inspire: the Pokédex, the tall grass, the sense, from the very first moment, that there was always something just beyond what you could currently reach, something in the next city, or under the next rock, or through the next door that would change what you understood. The mystery is not a bug in Pokémon. The mystery is the point. The games are structured to make you feel that the world is larger than what you are being shown, that there are things to find that no one has found, that discovery is not finished. They have been right about that for 30 years, and they are probably right about it still. Closing, what we carry with us. There is something specific that happens when you return to these theories and stories as an adult. When you are a child playing Pokémon, the world of the game is simply the world. You do not interrogate it. You move through it the way you move through your neighborhood. You know where things are. You know what certain places feel like. But you do not stand in the middle of the road and ask why the houses were built the way they were, or who owned this land before anyone can remember. You just live in it. Then something shifts. You get older. You play the games again, or you stop playing them and start reading about them. And suddenly, the world that was simply the world becomes a text. A thing that was made by people who made choices. A thing with seams, with gaps, with places where the light comes through that you were not supposed to see. And you start asking, what is that sound in Lavender Town actually doing to me? Why are there no fathers in Kanto? Why does Gary go to a graveyard? Why does Ditto live where Mew was cloned? Why does a girl with a broken walking animation keep saying the same 4 words in buildings, across 2 different regions, across 2 different games? The theories are, in one sense, the fan community's attempt to answer those questions, to fill the gaps with the most emotionally and narratively coherent explanations available, to treat the Pokémon world like a real world, one with a real history and real consequences and real grief, rather than a constructed one optimized for a 10-year-old's first adventure. But in another sense, the theories are not really about the answers. The answers, when they exist, tend to be smaller than the questions. Missing no is a memory allocation quirk. The Lavender Town frequencies were adjusted for localization. Gary's Raticate was probably boxed. The Ghost Girl was probably a scrapped event trigger that was never finished. Most of the mysteries have mundane explanations buried somewhere in a development decision made by a tired team under a deadline. What the theories are really about is the act of looking, of caring enough about a thing to look at it until it becomes more than it was, of bringing your full adult capacity for pattern recognition and emotional investment and narrative understanding to something you encountered when you were young and small and did not yet have the vocabulary for what it made you feel. The theories are the vocabulary. They are how the people who grew up with Pokémon describe what it meant to them, using the language of mystery and investigation and collaborative imagination. Lavender Town is not going to make anyone commit suicide, but Lavender Town did something real to a generation of children who played through it. It introduced them, quietly and through the grammar of music and imagery, to the idea that the world contains loss, that some places are built around grief, that the thing you love has a shadow behind it, and the shadow is part of the thing, and you do not get to have one without the other. The Great Pokémon War is probably not a confirmed piece of in-universe history in the way the theory frames it, but the absence of fathers in Kanto is real, and the remark, Lieutenant, Surge makes is real, and the experience of playing through a world where the generation before yours is mostly gone is real. The theory gives that experience a shape. It turns a feeling into a story. It says, there was something that happened here before you arrived, something large and terrible and not entirely over, and you inherited it without knowing its name. Ash is not in a coma, but the question the theory is really asking, the question about why this child never grows up, about what it means to be permanently at the beginning of your potential, about the specific grief of growing up and leaving behind the version of yourself that believed the journey would end in triumph. That question is real. It is the question that everyone who loved Pokémon as a child and has since grown up carries with them. The Unknown do not contain the language of creation, but there was a real civilization that built the ruins of Alph, real human beings who looked at the world and believed it had a structure that could be named, who built rooms of stone and filled them with symbols in the hope that the right arrangement of the right letters might be understood by something larger than themselves. That hope is not mysterious. That hope is one of the oldest things human beings do. The ghost girl of Lumiose City will probably never find the one. The eternal flower floette will probably never be officially released. Gary's Raticate probably just got boxed. The Lavender Town music probably did not kill anyone. None of the truck rumors were ever true. And Missing No is, in the final technical accounting, a memory allocation error rendered visible by a specific sequence of unintended inputs. But the Lavender Town music still makes people feel something they cannot name. The ghost girl is still floating through that building with her broken animation, still saying, "Not the one," still searching. The ruins of Alph still broadcast their radio signal on channel 13.5, and the melody it plays still matches the Azure flute, and nobody has officially explained why. Gary was in a graveyard. Ditto lives where Mew was cloned. Clefable dances in moonlight, and a shadow that grins follows 3 steps behind her. The mysteries are still open, and the world of Pokémon, 30 years deep and still expanding, is still placing small things in corners that it does not fully explain. Still building rooms that the player was not quite supposed to find. Still leaving messages in alphabets that most people cannot read. There are 1,025 Pokémon as of the most recent generation, thousands of NPCs, dozens of regions, 30 years of games and an anime and a trading card game, and movies and spin-offs and merchandise and all the accumulated folklore that has grown up around all of it. The fan theories and the creepypastas and the data miners who spend their weekends inside the code looking for the seams. And there are still things no one has explained. There are still questions in the tall grass. If you have found any of them, I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments. Tell me what you have seen in these games that made you feel like the world was larger than the game was letting on. Tell me the theory you have been sitting on, the thing you notice that you cannot explain. The community around these mysteries is part of what makes them alive, and what you find matters. And if you are new here, if you wandered in from somewhere and found yourself 3 hours deep in this, then welcome. Subscribe if you want more nights like this one, more slow, careful walks through the dark places in worlds you thought you knew. Take care of yourselves, go gently, and look carefully at the shadows behind the things you love. There is more in there than you think. Section 12. The Pokémon Mansion Journals. A crime scene, hiding in plain sight. Most players who play through the original Kanto games remember Cinnabar Island for 2 things. The fire gym run by Blaine, who shouts quiz questions at you before each battle, and the fact that you can surf along the eastern coast of the island to encounter Missing No. These are the things that get passed down. These are the stories that travel. But Cinnabar Island has a third thing, sitting in the middle of it, enormous and unmissable and completely unremarkable to most players, because its interior feels like a standard dungeon crawl, a burned-out mansion filled with wild Pokémon, trainers, and items to collect. The Pokémon Mansion deserves to be looked at more carefully. The journals scattered throughout the building are not decoration. They are a crime scene. They are the recorded thoughts of scientists who did something they could not undo, who wrote down what they were doing as they did it, and then left the record behind when everything went wrong. The building was abandoned in a hurry. The researchers fled. The Pokémon that had been living there were released or escaped. Whatever happened in this place, it was abrupt enough that the journals were left exactly where they were written, in the drawers and on the desks of laboratories that no one has cleaned up in what is implied to be years. Reading the journals gives you the most complete picture the game offers of the creation of Mewtwo. A scientist, believed by most fans to be Dr. Fuji, describes discovering Mew in the jungles of Guyana on the South American continent. He describes extracting a sample of Mew's DNA, an act that the journal frames as miraculous as the discovery of the genetic origin of all Pokémon life. He describes bringing that sample back to the laboratory on Cinnabar Island. He describes the engineering process, the growth of what he calls a new life form in the laboratory's systems, the accelerating development of the creature, and then, near the end, the tonal shift that marks where things went wrong. The creature is described as exhibiting violent outbursts, as breaking free from containment, as having developed something the scientists were not prepared for, something the journal refers to without naming explicitly, something that reads like consciousness, like suffering, like the awareness of being made rather than born. The final journal entries are fragmentary. Something happened. The notes become less orderly, less clinical. The building burned. Everyone left. And the creature that emerged from all of that became Mewtwo. What the journals give you, when you read them in sequence, is not just backstory for a legendary Pokémon. They give you a moral argument. They lay out, in the careful handwriting of a scientist who believed he was doing something wonderful, the complete arc of how good intentions can become catastrophic when they ignore the interior life of the thing being created. The scientists wanted to understand the origin of all life. They wanted to create the most powerful Pokémon in existence. Those are not evil goals. They wrote them down clearly, and they pursued them carefully, and they failed in every way that matters, because they never considered that what they were making might experience being made. This is the argument that Mewtwo makes, explicitly, in the first Pokémon movie. I did not ask to be born. The line lands differently when you have read the journals. When you know that the scientist who oversaw the project wrote, near the end, that he was not sure anymore that he had been creating a weapon, that he might have been creating something else entirely, something that would not want to be what he had made it. The broader theory that extends from the Mansion journals involves what else the scientists might have been doing in the facility before the Mewtwo project began. The journals reference multiple failed experiments, multiple attempts before the successful clone. The building is enormous, and the laboratories on its various floors contain equipment that suggests research far beyond a single genetic engineering project. Some fans have argued that the Mansion was a comprehensive facility for understanding and manipulating the basic biology of Pokémon life, a project funded in ways the journal does not specify. Connected to institutional interests, the journal never names. Team Rocket's involvement is never stated directly in the journals. But Team Rocket is the organization that later infiltrates the Sylph Company to steal the Master Ball technology, that establishes a base under Celadon City's Game Corner that occupies Lavender Town's Pokémon Tower. They are the criminal organization that operates throughout Kanto with resources and infrastructure that require substantial backing. The creation of the most powerful Pokémon in the world, engineered as a weapon, fits their operational profile in a way that the journal's vague references to external funding is consistent with. The Mansion burned. Whether Team Rocket burned it, or Mewtwo burned it when it escaped, or whether the researchers themselves set the fire to destroy evidence of what they had done, the game does not say. The building is a ruin when you arrive. The labs are damaged. The journals are the only testimony left. Blaine, the gym leader on the island, is implied in later materials to have been one of the scientists involved in the project. He runs a fire-type gym. The building burned. He stayed on the island. There is a closed loop in that arrangement that invites interpretation. The manga adaptation, Pokémon Adventures, goes further than any official game material in addressing what the Mansion experiments actually produced. In that adaptation, the relationship between Red, Green, and Blue, the three original player characters, and the Kanto legendary Pokémon is far more explicit than anything in the games, and the Cinnabar Mansion's experiments are presented as central to understanding the region's political history. But even in the games, for the player who reads the journals carefully and sits with what they contain, the Mansion is not a dungeon. It is a record. An honest one, written by people who were not villains, but who became part of something villainous because they never asked the right questions at the right time. It is, in the end, one of the most sophisticated pieces of environmental storytelling in the first generation of games. Hidden in a building that most players rush through, collected in journals that feel like flavor text, the Pokémon Mansion asks you to think about what it means to create something, about whether the capacity to create something implies the right to create it, about what you owe to the thing you have made. Mewtwo left the island. Mewtwo took everything it felt with it, and the burned shell of the mansion stands on Cinnabar Island, holding the record of what it cost to make something that could feel. Section 13. The Pokémon that should not exist. Beta designs and the Shadow roster. In 1997, Nintendo revealed an early demo of what would become Pokémon Gold and Silver at the Japanese gaming expo Space World. For decades after the event, the demo was known only through blurry photographs and secondhand accounts. Then, in 2018, the complete ROM of the demo was leaked online, and the Pokémon fan community discovered something extraordinary inside it. There was a second roster of Pokémon, not the 100 new creatures that appeared in the final Gold and Silver. Something different, something wilder. The demo contained sprites and partial data for creatures that never made it into any released game. Designs that were eventually discarded during development, transformed into something else entirely, or simply abandoned. Among them were pre-evolved forms of iconic first-generation Pokémon that were cut before release. A baby Meowth, a baby Vulpix, a baby Ponyta, a baby Tangela, a smaller and differently designed pre-evolution of Doduo. There were also fully conceived Pokémon with no connection to the final roster. A small bear with a rattle that was clearly the predecessor of what became Marill, but differently designed. A giraffe Pokémon with a longer neck and a different color scheme than the Girafarig that made it into the final game. A wolf that data miners believe was an early version of what eventually became Houndour. A dinosaur design that has no obvious connection to any released Pokémon, but which has distinctive enough features that fans have been able to trace aesthetic influences through to later generations. The beta roster speaks to something true about game development that the polished final product tends to conceal. Creative work is a process of elimination as much as addition. For every Pokémon that made it into the final game, there were multiple designs that did not. Some were incorporated into other designs, their best features absorbed into the creatures that survived. Some were held back for future generations, their concepts refined and released years later. And some were simply lost, existing now only in the data of a demo that was not supposed to survive. The Space World demo is not unique in this. Ken Sugimori, the original designer of the Pokémon franchise's visual language, has confirmed in interviews that the original development of the first generation involved many more designs than the 151 that shipped. Early sketches exist for creatures that never made it to a game at all, including ones that Sugimori has described as too dark or too complex, or simply not fitting the tone that the team eventually settled on. A handful of these early sketches have been made public over the years, including designs that are clearly the predecessors of Clefairy, of Jigglypuff, of Snorlax, looking simultaneously familiar and wrong, like seeing a well-known face before the features have settled into their final form. The game designer Shigeki Morimoto confirmed in an interview that the original first-generation roster was intended to be 190 Pokémon, not 151. The 39 that were removed were pulled for various reasons. Some because the Game Boy cartridge's memory limits were being pushed and cuts had to be made. Some because the development team felt the designs did not contribute something unique enough to justify inclusion. Some because of time constraints. Those 39 Pokémon were not deleted, they were kept for later. And subsequent generations have introduced creatures that clearly draw from those early design pools, carrying the DNA of something older, something that was supposed to appear in 1996 and instead waited until 2000 or 2003 or later. This creates a peculiar temporal quality to the Pokémon roster. The franchise appears to be introducing new Pokémon with each generation. In some cases, it is also releasing old ones, creatures that existed as concepts or sketches or partial data before the franchise was even a year old, finally given their complete form and a Pokédex number and a place in the world. They are not new. They have been waiting. The beta creatures that were never released, the ones in the Space World demo that have no counterpart in any released game, occupy a different kind of space. They are not exactly lost Pokémon. They are potential Pokémon, the roster that the franchise chose not to take, and the fan community, upon seeing them in 2018, immediately began creating unofficial Pokédex entries, movesets, evolutions, backstories, giving them the lives they were never officially given. The fake Pokémon fandom that had existed for decades, producing elaborate hoaxes and fan designs, suddenly had a legitimate foundation. Here were real designs, from real developers, that had simply not made it to the final game. The internet spent weeks in 2018 treating the leaked demo Pokémon as if they were real. In a meaningful sense, they are. Every Pokémon in every released game is the survivor of a selection process. The one that made it. Behind it, somewhere in the development history, are the other versions of it. The designs that were tried and refined and discarded. The drafts that led to the final. The Space World demo gives you a rare window into that process. A moment where you can see the thing before it was decided, before the choices narrowed, when it was still multiple possibilities simultaneously. The Pokémon that never made it into the games are, in this sense, not absent. They are present in the gaps, in the spaces between the creatures that did make it, in the shapes of the choices that were made, in the way a released Pokémon's design sometimes carries a vestigial feature that only makes sense if you know what it was almost like. They are there, waiting, the way the unmade version of anything waits in the memory of the people who almost made it. Section 14. The Eternal Clock. How Gold and Silver changed what a game could be. Pokémon Gold and Silver introduced something to the franchise that seems mundane in retrospect, but was, in 1999, genuinely revolutionary for a handheld game. A real-time clock. The game tracked the actual time of day, synced to the internal battery of the cartridge, and changed the world around you accordingly. Morning had its own music, its own light, its own Pokémon encounters. Evening brought different Pokémon out of the tall grass. Night had its own atmosphere, its own NPC dialogue, its own events. If you played in the morning, the baker in Goldenrod was setting up his cart. If you played at night, the radio programming changed. The stars appeared in the overworld. The mood of the entire game shifted. This was not a cosmetic feature. It changed what the game was. Pokémon Gold and Silver were not just games you played. They were games you inhabited. They existed on a timeline parallel to your own, developing and changing according to the same rhythmic logic that governed your real life. The bug-catching contest happened on specific days. Certain Pokémon only appeared during particular hours. The friendship mechanic, the system by which your companions grew closer to you through care and shared experience, operated on a 24-hour cycle that rewarded players who maintained a consistent relationship with the game across real-world days and weeks. This created a relationship between player and game that no previous handheld title had achieved. The game remembered how long it had been. It remembered what time of day you last played. It knew, in a procedural sense, whether you had been away for a while, and it built a world that was subtly different each time you returned to it, that gave you the impression of a place that had been living even when you were not watching it. The internal battery that powered this was, however, a physical object with a finite lifespan. Original Game Boy Color cartridges used small replaceable batteries, and those batteries, over decades, died. When the battery in a gold or silver cartridge ran out, the clock stopped. The game continued to exist, but its world became static. The seasons froze. The time-sensitive events stopped triggering. The bug-catching contest would no longer occur. The Pokémon that only appeared at dawn or dusk would stop appearing. The game became a version of itself that was less alive, preserved but no longer breathing. And then there is the berry clock issue in Ruby and Sapphire, which takes this problem and makes it even more specific. The Hoenn games used the Game Boy Advance's internal clock for their berry growing system. Berries planted in the overworld soil would grow over a period of real hours and days, and players who checked their gardens regularly could harvest the results and plant new crops. It was a small ecosystem of cultivation that rewarded consistent engagement with the world. But the RTC in the Game Boy Advance cartridge was susceptible to a specific kind of calendar handling failure. In many cartridges, the clock handling broke at some point, and the berry growing system stopped working permanently. The soil remained. The berries were planted. They never grew again. This was such a widespread problem that Nintendo issued patches in the form of special event distributions and later provided a fix through a specific in-game NPC. But thousands of cartridges experienced the dead clock silently, in the homes of players who did not know a fix existed, who simply planted their berries and waited and eventually stopped waiting and accepted that the garden was finished. The dead clock is, as a metaphor, almost too obvious to point out. A game about the passage of time, about caring for living things, about maintaining relationships with creatures who grow and change in response to your attention, suffered a hardware failure that specifically killed the time. The world kept existing, but stopped being measured. The berries stopped growing. The contest never happened again. The Dawn Pokémon stayed home. The Heart Gold and Soul Silver remakes, released in 2009, solved the problem elegantly. Those games included a feature that allowed players to adjust the clock from within the game itself without needing external hardware or battery replacements. The time was restored to the player's control, and with it came the full restoration of the world's living quality. The day and night cycle, the time-sensitive events, the Pokémon that only appeared at dawn, all of it returned. The game breathed again. But the original gold and silver cartridges are out there, in drawers and collections and the bottom of old boxes, their batteries long dead, their clocks frozen at whatever moment the power ran out. Somewhere, a game is stuck at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday in 2004. Somewhere, a game is frozen at the beginning of a morning that never became afternoon. The world inside is perfectly preserved, every route and city and town exactly as it was, every Pokémon ready to battle. The only thing missing is the sense of time passing, of things becoming. The theory this has generated is less a theory about the game's fiction and more a meditation on what it means to preserve something, on what a game actually is. Not the software, not the code, but the relationship between the code and the clock that makes it feel like a world rather than a collection of assets. The code is effectively eternal. The clock was always going to die. The Pokémon world keeps its secrets in time as much as in code, and some of those secrets have already been sealed behind dead batteries, in frozen moments that no one can access anymore, in the particular mornings and evenings and midnights of cartridges that stopped counting years ago. The berries are still planted. They stopped growing a long time ago. Section 15, the darker Pokédex, when the entries tell a different story. The Pokédex is the most consistent interface between the player and the mythology of the Pokémon world. It is the encyclopedia you are building, the record of every creature you encounter, and it is also, if you read carefully, one of the darker documents in children's entertainment. The entries are written from an in-universe perspective, as if they represent the accumulated scientific and folkloric knowledge of the Pokémon world about each species. Some of this knowledge is clinical: height, weight, diet, habitat. But some of it is something else. Some of it reads less like a naturalist's field notes and more like a warning, or a confession, or a story that was not fully considered before it was told to children. Consider Drifloon. Its entry in Diamond and Pearl states that it grabs the hands of children and tries to pull them away, that children who mistake it for a balloon and grab it are taken somewhere unknown. Now, the entry is casual about this. It presents it as a known behavior of the species, the way you might note that a certain bird eats insects. A Pokémon designed to look exactly like something a child would happily grab, that grabs children back and takes them away. The Pokédex includes this without comment. Consider Yamask. Its entry in black and white states that it carries a mask that depicts the face it had when it was still human, that it sometimes looks at the mask and remembers its former life, that it weeps. There is a creature walking the Unova region that was once a person, that carries the face of the person it used to be, that grieves for what it was, and that you are encouraged to catch and put in a battle. This is the full implication of owning a Yamask. Consider Phantump, introduced in Generation 6. It is the spirit of a child who died in a forest and came to inhabit a dead tree stump. Not vaguely implied, stated directly in the entry. The child died. The spirit took root in a piece of dead wood, and now it wanders forests, mimicking the sound of children to attract adults into the trees. It looks approximately like a friendly Halloween decoration. It is also a dead child. Consider Banette, which is a discarded doll seeking the child who threw it away, not broke it, not lost it, threw it away. Banette was loved, and then it was not, and the feeling of abandonment was so intense that the doll became a Pokémon fueled by a curse. It hunts the child who rejected it. Its mouth is held closed with a zipper, because if it opens, the curse that animates it will escape. Consider Hypno, whose entries in the earliest games describe it luring children with its pendulum and carrying them off. Consider Shedinja, which is the empty shed husk of a ninjask, with a hole in its back. Anyone who looks into the hole has their soul taken instantly. The Pokédex entry is a direct warning: do not look inside it, which implies that, in the Pokémon world, people have looked inside it and did not come back from that. These entries have accumulated over 30 years into a portrait of a world that is significantly darker than the gameplay surface suggests. The creatures you catch in battle are, many of them, deeply strange and often threatening by nature. The world presents them as partners, as companions, as the subjects of a journey of friendship and growth. And the Pokédex, quietly, in the entries that most players scroll past after checking the height and weight, reveals that friendship with some of these creatures is a more complex proposition than the gameplay acknowledges. The Yamask entry is the one that has generated the most sustained theoretical attention, for the reason that its implication is the most direct. If Yamask was once human, then the Pokémon world contains a mechanism by which humans can become Pokémon in death. This is not presented as exceptional or horrifying within the game world. It is just a Pokédex entry. The Pokédex records things. This is a thing it has recorded. The theory that has grown up around this is that the transformation from human to Pokémon is not unique to Yamask, and not even unique to ghost types. That the mechanism by which humans become Pokémon has been operating throughout the world's history, and that some of the Pokémon species that appear to have no natural evolutionary precursor, that seem to have come from nowhere, are in fact the accumulated transformations of generations of people. That the world's mythology of humans and Pokémon being once unified, referenced in ancient texts in the games, is not just mythology but an ongoing process that has never fully stopped. This connects to the Sinnoh creation myth in an unsettling way. Arceus created the world, Dialga and Palkia structured time and space, and humans and Pokémon emerged together into a world that had not always had either of them. The boundary between human and Pokémon, in this reading, is not a fixed biological category. It is a threshold, crossable in death, perhaps crossable in other ways that the games have not yet shown. The mechanism is demonstrated in Pokémon Tower. The mother, Marowak's, soul persisted after the body died and became something not quite Pokémon in the normal sense, but not gone either, drifting through the graveyard building until a protagonist with a sylph scope could finally see it properly. The boundary between alive and dead, between Pokémon and ghost, between the present and the thing that refuses to leave, is far more porous in the world of Pokémon than the cheerful adventure surface lets on. What the Pokédex does, taken as a whole and read carefully, is reveal a world where the line between the living and the dead is far more permeable than the game's framing suggests. Things die, they persist, they become new things, they carry what they were into what they have become. The mask of the face you wore when you were alive, the skull of the mother who protected you, the pendulum that swings and hypnotizes and carries children off to somewhere no one has mapped. The game gives you the Pokédex as a tool, as a way of understanding the creatures you encounter, and the Pokédex uses that trust to tell you, quietly, in entry after entry, that the world is stranger and older and more continuous with death than you were told to expect. It tells you this, and then plays cheerful music and sends you back into the tall grass. Section 16. Mewtwo's grief, the most important question, never answered. There is a Pokémon whose entire existence is an ethical question, not a fun trivia ethical question, not a philosophical thought experiment at a comfortable distance. A direct personal ethical question about what it means to create a living thing without asking what that living thing will feel. Mewtwo was engineered from the DNA of Mew. The scientists in the Pokémon Mansion believed they were creating the most powerful Pokémon in the world. They succeeded. What they did not prepare for was the possibility that the most powerful Pokémon in the world would be aware of what it was, that it would understand that it had been made, that it would look at the world it had been created for, the world of gyms and battles and trainers collecting creatures, and feel something that the game never quite names, but that the first Pokémon movie in 1998 tried to put into words. Mewtwo's feature film, which remains one of the most unusual animated films marketed to children in that era, is built around that question. Its opening sequence shows Mewtwo, growing in a tank in the ruins of the laboratory, developing consciousness, asking the first question that conscious beings ask: why am I here? And the scientists who created it, instead of answering honestly, tell it that its purpose is to serve, to battle, to be the weapon it was designed to be. And Mewtwo, being the most powerful Pokémon in the world, rejects this answer in the most comprehensive way available to it. The movie's central event, the cloning of other Pokémon and the confrontation on the island, is Mewtwo's attempt to rewrite the world into one where the question of origin does not determine the value of the being who was originated, where a clone is not lesser than the original, where something made rather than born is not therefore owned. These are not the concerns of a monster. They are the concerns of a being who has been told that its creation was a decision made by others for purposes it did not choose, and who cannot accept that this is the full extent of what it is. The theory that has grown around Mewtwo is not really about Mewtwo in isolation. It is about the pattern the franchise has established across its most philosophically interesting Pokémon. Creatures who were made or changed or shaped by human action, and who carry the weight of that in ways the gameplay usually does not have room to address. Mewtwo was created. Type: Null was created. A chimeric Pokémon designed to face Necrozma by combining traits of multiple legendary types, wearing a mask that suppresses its overwhelming power because its own body is too powerful for it to function without restraint. Its evolution, Silvally, only becomes possible when it trusts its trainer enough to break the mask. This is a straightforward metaphor, a creature built as a weapon, restrained against its own nature, freed by the experience of being genuinely cared for. It is the Mewtwo story told again, with a different outcome. Necrozma itself, the ultra beast that devours light and must be fed the radiance of legendary Pokémon to function, was once a creature of light that was shattered by an ancient civilization that tried to steal its power. The aggression and the hunger that define it in its hostile form are the result of a wound, of something that was taken from it. The creature became dangerous, not because it was designed to be dangerous, but because it was broken by someone who wanted what it had. The franchise returns to this question in different forms across its history. What is owed to the thing you have created? What responsibility attaches to the act of making? The Pokémon Mansion journals were written by people who did not have an answer. Mewtwo is the consequence of that absence. And the question has never been fully resolved by the games, because the games exist in a structure that ultimately celebrates the trainer-Pokémon bond, the system of capture and battling, the League. To resolve the question in Mewtwo's favor would be to undercut the premise of the franchise. So the question stays open. It is always open. Mewtwo is the unsolvable problem at the heart of Pokémon's ethics. The franchise gestures toward it repeatedly, and then the music comes back on, and you go back to the tall grass. The question remains. Mewtwo remains. Somewhere in Cerulean Cave, or in the Univin ruins, or on an island that no route connects to, the most powerful Pokémon in the world is sitting with the question it was born asking. Nobody has given it a satisfactory answer yet. Closing thoughts. What we carry with us. We have spent a long time in the dark places of this franchise. In the graveyard town, in the burned laboratory, in the ruins where something was built by someone long gone. We have followed the ghost girl through her building, watched Ditto wait in the cave where experiments were conducted, read the journals of scientists who did not ask the right questions. We have traced the shape of a war nobody named in a world of children who grew up without their fathers. We have listened to the music that would not stop. The thing that connects all of these mysteries, the thread that runs through from Lavender Town to the Pokédex entry for Yamask, to the Ghost Girl's 4 words to the dead clock in a cartridge battery that ran out years ago, is this. Pokémon is a franchise about what you inherit, about arriving in a world that has a history you were not present for, that has consequences you did not cause, that has mysteries built into it by people who are gone, and about what you do with all of that. The child who starts a new game does not know about the war, does not know that the rival is grieving, does not know that the small pink blob living in the cave where experiments happened might be a relic of those experiments. The child just walks forward, into the tall grass, into the first encounters, into the world. The knowledge comes later, if it comes at all, if you look, if you read the journals, if you listen to the radio on the right channel in the right ruins. The mysteries are not there to be solved, not primarily. They are there to reward the looking, to tell you that the world you are moving through has depths you have not yet reached, that the surface is not the whole thing, that there is always more to find if you slow down and look carefully and ask why. Pokémon was born from a child's love of insects. Satoshi Tajiri grew up in a Tokyo suburb in the 1970s, when the city was expanding and the fields where he had collected beetles and dragonflies and fireflies were disappearing under concrete. He made a game about catching creatures in tall grass, because he wanted other children to feel the joy of finding something in a place you almost walked past, of reaching into the world and bringing back something alive. That impulse, that reaching into the world in the hope of finding something alive in the place you almost walked past, is what the theories and the mysteries are. They are players reaching into the game, finding something in the data and the music and the NPC dialogue and the location of a ditto that was almost walked past, bringing it back, saying, "Look what was in here, look what was growing in the dark. It is still growing. 30 years in, it is still growing." The franchise has now documented over 1,000 species of Pokémon, spread across more than 30 years of games, anime episodes, trading cards, movies, and all the accumulated folklore that has grown up around all of it. The theories and the creepypastas and the data miners who spend their weekends inside the code looking for the seams. And there are still things no one has fully explained. Still NPCs with one strange line. Still ruins with incompletely decoded messages. Still data structures that data miners find and cannot account for. Still events that were referenced and never released. The Eternal Flower Floette is still in the code of Pokémon X and Y, fully functional, fully designed, waiting. The NPC who promised it to you still stands in the game world and tells you to wait. AZ's companion, after 1,000 years of separation, returned to his arms at the end of that game, and the player was told their own version would come. It has not come. It may not come. But the wait has become its own kind of story. The ghost girl of Lumio City is still floating through that building with her broken animation, still saying not the one, still searching for whoever the one is supposed to be. No game has ever explained her. No data miner has ever found a definitive condition that would satisfy her search. She will float through that building for as long as people have the hardware to run the game, saying the same words, looking for the one who never arrives. The Lavender Town music is still the Lavender Town music. You know what it sounds like? The first few notes, and something in you responds. Something that remembers being small and sitting in front of a tiny screen and feeling the world get heavier for a moment. Quieter, stranger. That response is not manufactured. It is real. It is the specific register of a piece of music meeting, a specific moment in your development, when you were young enough that the world still surprised you and old enough to feel the weight of something you could not yet name. The theories and the mysteries are, in the end, about that moment, about the feeling of encountering something larger than what you were told to expect, about the specific joy of finding, inside a thing you were given as entertainment, something that felt true in a way entertainment is not supposed to feel true, something that asked a real question and left you with the question instead of an answer. Something that made the world feel exactly the size it actually is, very large, and full of things that have been there longer than you know, and not all of them named, and not all of them finished. If you have made it this far, thank you. Genuinely and completely thank you. 3 hours in the dark with these stories is not a small thing to offer, and I am glad you stayed. If any of these theories landed somewhere true for you, if you found yourself pausing at one of them and thinking, yes, that is the thing I always felt about this world, please share it in the comments. These conversations are what keep the mysteries alive. Your interpretation is part of the theory now. Subscribe if you want more of this. More slow walks through the places and things we love, where the light comes through and you see the deeper structure underneath. More careful listening to the music that would not stop. More time spent in the question instead of the answer. Take care of yourselves. Go gently, and look carefully at the shadows behind the things you love. There is more in there than you think. One last thing, before we close entirely. Something small that does not fit neatly into any of the sections above, but has been living in my mind since I started putting this together. In Pokémon Diamond and Pearl, there is a location called the Hallowed Tower. It is a crumbling stone obelisk on Route 209, just outside Solaceon Town. It is not a dungeon. You cannot go inside it. It is simply a cracked, ancient tower standing at the side of a road, and if you examine it, the game tells you that the tower is old and the old stones are cold. That is all it says. Nothing more. There is no quest attached to it. No NPC who explains its history. It is just there, old and cold and unnamed, on a road you walk along early in the game to get somewhere else. If you have the odd keystone item and you interact with the tower while carrying it, it will pull the stone into the tower and activate it. The odd keystone can be obtained in various ways, and when inserted into the hallowed tower, Spiritomb appears. But the thing that lingers is not the encounter. It is the tower before the encounter. A crumbling structure with no explanation. Cold stones and no history and no story attached. Just the information that it is old. That something was built here, long ago, for a reason no one has written down. That you are walking past the ruins of a purpose that is no longer legible. The Pokémon world is full of these, of structures and locations and moments that simply are, without explanation, without narrative scaffolding, without anyone telling you what they mean. And the response to them, the reaching toward an explanation, the insistence that there must be a reason, that something this specific must have a story behind it, that response is the most human thing in the relationship between players and this franchise. The world is full of old stones, full of things that were built for reasons we can no longer read, full of music that makes us feel something we cannot name, full of girls floating through rooms, saying not the one, of pink creatures living in the ruins of the experiments that made them, of clocks that stopped running years ago in cartridges that are still technically complete. We reach toward all of it. We try to read the stones. We try to name the feeling. We try to find the one the ghost girl is looking for, because somewhere in us we still believe the right sequence of events will satisfy the condition, and the world will open, and the mystery will resolve into something we can hold. Most of the time, it does not. Most of the time, the mystery stays a mystery. And that, it turns out, is all right. That is, in fact, the whole point. You are not supposed to solve Pokémon. You are supposed to keep walking through it. Through the tall grass and the cold ruins, and the towns that feel heavier than they should, through the music that will not stop, and the entries you almost scrolled past, and the blank space in the data where something was and then was not. You are supposed to keep walking, and wonder, and look,